here you are, welcomed softly by Dreamtime Science in the silence of a starlit evening. Picture a quiet library, tall windows revealing the velvety night sky, scattered with shimmering lights far, far away. It's a place where the mind may wander freely, where every word floats like a gentle breeze across your thoughts. If you feel at home in these stories, a quiet like or a subscription would help light our way, and do share a note in the comments about the peaceful place you're listening from. Now, take a moment to find perfect comfort. Adjust your position, perhaps turn over on your side, and breathe in the calm that night brings. We are ready to begin our gentle exploration now, together, letting every whisper of science bring you closer to rest and wonder under this soft, endless sky. Tonight we glide very slowly, very gently, into a world where trees might whisper secrets through the quiet forest air. Imagine a hidden language, soft as a sigh, woven between leaves and roots, inviting our curious hearts to listen. Let's drift together, keeping a safe, pillow-soft distance, as we explore the gentle mysteries of how trees may talk. If this peaceful blend of science and serenity helps ease your evening, consider joining our community of gentle learners. Share your favorite moment of scientific awe in the comments. Now take a moment, adjust your blanket, find the perfect hollow in your pillow, let your shoulders melt, breathe in and out. Night falls upon the silent forest, and the trees stand sentinel beneath a sky wheeling with ancient constellations. The hush is deep, velvet and profound, broken only by the rustle of a soft breeze through the canopy, or the faint scurrying of a nocturnal creature somewhere in the undergrowth. To the casual observer, this is a world of stillness and solitude, a green architecture built of silence and patience. The trunks rise like columns in a cathedral, their crowns lost in the darkness above, their roots winding quietly through the cool earth below. Yet, what if this silence is not emptiness, but instead a great ongoing conversation, one so slow and subtle that it flows beneath our notice like a current beneath the visible world? What if the trees, so often seen as mute and indifferent, are instead engaged in their own secret forms of dialogue and communion? This question, simple yet profound, has haunted the dreams and stories of humanity for centuries. In the twilight between waking and sleep, as your mind slips towards the edge of dreams, let us wander together into this forest of curiosity, where science and story intertwine, and where the boundaries between the ordinary and the marvelous begin to blur. Across cultures and ages, people have looked at forests and wondered at their mystery. The ancient Celts revered their groves as places of power, thick with spirits and wisdom. In the dense jungles of Papua New Guinea or the vast boreal forests of Siberia, shamans have long believed that trees are alive in ways more subtle than mere growth and shade. The rustling of leaves, the creaking of trunks in the wind, these might, to a sensitive ear, form a kind of language, a song of life heard only by those who listen long enough. In our stories, too, the idea of trees as sentient, even communicative, is a recurring motif. Consider the towering Ents of Tolkien's Middle-earth, ancient shepherds of the forest, with faces formed from bark and voices like the slow rolling of deep water. The Ents speak in ponderous syllables, their language as old as the hills themselves. They debate and deliberate, remembering the passage of ages and the rise and fall of empires. When they move, the earth shakes underfoot. When they speak, it is with the wisdom of centuries. Tolkien, a linguist and lover of trees, imagined a world where the forest was not a backdrop but a participant in the unfolding drama of the world. Or drift further afield into the vibrant, bioluminescent jungles of James Cameron's Pandora, where the Na'vi commune with the great tree Ewa through tendrils of light and memory. Here, the forest is a living neural network, a vast biological internet linking every tree, every creature, every root. Information pulses through mycorrhizal filaments. Memories are stored in the roots, and the very ground is alive with connection. These visions captivate us, not because they are entirely alien, but because, on some deep level, they resonate with our own sense that forests are more than mere collections of timber and leaf. There is a strange longing in us to believe that the green world is not oblivious to our presence, that it is not indifferent, but in some mysterious sense aware. In the hush of a moonlit forest, with the scent of moss and earth thick in the air, it's easy to imagine that the trees are whispering secrets to each other, their voices pitched too low or too slow for human ears. The reality, as we shall see, is both stranger and subtler than the wildest tales. But before we drift into scientific explanation, let us linger for a while in this space of wonder. Imagine walking alone beneath the ancient oaks and beeches, their trunks gnarled with age, their limbs outstretched like the arms of dancers. Every so often a leaf detaches and swirls to the ground, a silent messenger carrying news of the season's change. The forest is a place of patience, a place where time moves not in days, but in years and centuries, where a single ring of growth marks the passage of another summer, another winter survived. Confronted with such longevity, human life seems fleeting, almost frantic. Our conversations are quick, our memories short. We live and die in the blink of a forest's eye. If trees do speak, it would be in a language of slow pulses, of chemical gradients and electrical flickers, a dialogue measured not in seconds, but in seasons and years. This sense that the green world is alive with hidden purpose has haunted the minds of those who wander the woods. The philosopher Plato once wrote that trees and plants are the most noble of all living things. Goethe, the German poet and scientist, believed that plants were possessed of a spirit that animated their slow unfolding towards the sun. In the 19th century, the Indian scientist Jagadish Chandra Bose performed experiments suggesting that plants could feel pain and respond to stimuli, their reactions recorded by sensitive instruments as tiny shivers and oscillations. While many of Bose's claims were exaggerated or misunderstood, the idea that trees might be aware, might respond, has never fully faded from the collective imagination. Even in modern times, the question persists. Are forests simply collections of individual organisms, each striving for sunlight and space, or are they communities woven together by threads of connection and communication? Is there, beneath the bark and soil, a network through which information and warning pass, a web of mutual aid and rivalry as complex as any animal society? The forest, of course, keeps its secrets well. Unlike animals, trees do not move from place to place. They do not have eyes to see, or ears to hear, or mouths to speak. Their lives are lived in perpetual stillness, their struggles slow and largely invisible. To us, they seem isolated, each tree a solitary pillar, fending for itself. Yet there are moments, rare and fleeting, when the veil lifts and we catch glimpses of something greater. In the spring, when the sap rises and the leaves unfurl, the forest seems to thrum with energy. The air is scented with the green perfume of new growth, and the ground is alive with the push of roots and shoots. In the autumn, as the leaves turn to gold and crimson, the trees shed their bounty in a great silent offering to the soil. The cycles of death and renewal are played out with a grandeur and grace that no single tree could accomplish alone. Here and there, hints of cooperation emerge. In the tangled depths of an old-growth forest, saplings struggle in the shade of their elders, waiting for a gap in the canopy to let in the sun. When a tree falls, its decaying trunk becomes a nursery for new life, feeding fungi, mosses, and the young trees that will one day take its place. In the root-soaked earth, unseen by human eyes, 1,000 interactions play out each day, roots entwining, fungi weaving their nets, nutrients flowing from one organism to another. It is here, in the dark and secret world beneath our feet, that the first whispers of communication begin to emerge. The notion that trees might talk to each other, that they might share information or resources, has long seemed fanciful to many. The stories of talking trees were relegated to the realms of fantasy and folklore, charming but unscientific. But as the tools of modern science have grown more subtle and sensitive, the boundary between myth and reality has grown ever thinner. Consider for a moment the slow drama of a forest under siege. A herd of hungry deer moves through the understory, stripping leaves and twigs from the young saplings. In response, some trees are known to change the chemistry of their leaves, producing bitter or toxic compounds that deter further browsing. It is a defensive maneuver, an act of self-preservation. But in some cases, neighboring trees, untouched by the deer, begin to do the same, as if they have somehow received advance warning of the threat. How could this be? The idea that trees might warn each other, might send signals through the air or soil, suggests a level of complexity and cooperation that challenges our assumptions about what plants are capable of. The forest, it seems, is not merely a battleground, but a community, a network of lives intertwined. This possibility has only deepened with the discovery of networks of fungi, the so-called wood wide web, weaving their hyphal threads through the soil, connecting the roots of distant trees. Through these fungal channels, resources can be shared. Carbon, water, nutrients passed from one tree to another, sometimes even between different species. A mother tree, towering over her offspring, may send sugars and signals through the fungal network, nurturing the young in the shadows. In times of drought or disease, the web becomes a lifeline, a means of survival. The forest, then, is not silent and not solitary. Its voices are chemical, electrical, and slow, messages carried in the breath of leaves, the pulse of sap, the silent traffic of molecules beneath the ground. The language of trees is not one of words or sound, but of signals written in the code of life itself. And yet these revelations raise as many questions as they answer. If trees can communicate, what do they say? Is their speech limited to warnings and resource sharing, or is there a deeper, richer dialogue unfolding beneath the surface? Do different species converse, or are their communications strictly selfish, limited to kin and close neighbors? What can we learn from these slow, subtle conversations, and how might they change the way we understand the world around us? In the half-light of the forest, the answers remain elusive, drifting just out of reach like the last rays of the setting sun. The stories of talking trees, once dismissed as fantasy, now seem to contain a kernel of truth, a hint that the world is stranger and more interconnected than we ever dreamed. As the night deepens and the wind stirs in the high branches, the forest seems to draw a little closer, as if listening to its own secrets. Somewhere in the darkness, a fox slips between the trunks, and an owl calls out from a hidden perch. The roots shift and settle, the leaves murmur in the breeze, and the ancient conversation continues, patient and unhurried. There is so much yet to uncover. The scientific tools that allow us to peer into the hidden lives of trees are still young, their revelations just beginning. The language of the forest is subtle and strange, and we are only beginning to decipher its grammar. For now it is enough to listen, to stand among the trees and feel for a moment that we are part of something larger and older than ourselves. The forest is not silent, and its whispers are waiting to be heard. In the quiet that follows, let us linger at the edge of this mystery, our curiosity awakened, our senses attuned to the faintest hint of dialogue drifting through the leaves. The night is long, and the story of the forest is only just beginning to unfold. Beneath the forest floor, where roots wind softly through cool, dark earth, an invisible conversation is always underway. This dialogue is older than language itself, and it is not shaped by words or voices. It is a tapestry of signals and exchanges carried out in silence by threads finer than silk, spun by lives neither wholly plant nor animal, the fungi. Here, in the dim world beneath our feet, trees, thought to be stoic and solitary, reveal themselves as social beings, their fates entwined through delicate, living filaments. Quiet as snowfall, the filigree of fungal hyphae presses against the root tips of a beech, a pine, a maple. Where root meets fungus, the boundary blurs, cells interlock, nutrients pass, and information flows. This is the mycorrhizal network, often called the Wood Wide Web, a phrase that captures its complexity and reach. Let us step slowly into this hidden realm and listen, as best we can, to the silent conversations of trees. It begins with a touch. The roots of a young sapling reach outward, exploring the soil in search of water and minerals. On their journey, they encounter the questing hyphae of a mycorrhizal fungus. The fungus, too, is searching, hungry for sugars which it cannot produce itself. When root and hyphae meet, a partnership forms. The fungus wraps itself around the root tips, sometimes even pushing between plant cells in a gentle embrace. In exchange for a portion of the sugars the tree manufactures through photosynthesis, the fungus extends the tree's reach into the soil, delivering water, phosphorus, nitrogen, and other nutrients that the tree would otherwise struggle to obtain. This partnership is ancient, stretching back over 400 million years to the time when the first plants ventured onto land. Fossilized roots from the Devonian period show traces of these early alliances. The world's great forests, in all their grandeur, would not exist without this quiet cooperation. Yet the relationship is more than a simple trade. The fungi connect not just a single tree, but many, linking root to root, crown to crown, across vast distances. Through this network, trees share more than nutrients. They share information. When a spruce is attacked by hungry beetles, it releases chemical signals into the soil, distress signals, warning of the danger. These signals pass through the fungal filaments, reaching neighboring trees. In response, these neighbors may ramp up their own chemical defenses, producing bitter compounds that make their needles a less tempting meal. The danger has not yet reached them, but they are forewarned, and so they prepare. This perhaps is the closest nature comes to a forest-wide alarm system. But unlike the shrill metallic ring of a siren, the warning flows gently, quietly, beneath the ground, from one living being to another. Some trees, grown tall and strong in the dappled sunlight, act as central nodes in this network. These mother trees, as they are sometimes called, anchor the fungal web, connecting to dozens or even hundreds of their neighbors. When a mother tree is healthy, she shares her abundance, carbon, nitrogen, water, with younger saplings, especially those shaded by the canopy above. The carbon, fixed in her sunlit leaves, travels down her trunk, through her roots, and out along the fungal threads to the roots of her offspring. In this way, trees nurture their young, feeding them in the darkness until they are strong enough to reach the light. The sharing is not limited to kin. Trees of different species, sometimes even rivals, may be linked by the same fungal network. A birch, for example, may send carbon to a neighboring Douglas fir, and vice versa, depending on the season and the needs of each. In spring, when the birch is flush with new leaves, it may share its bounty with the fir, which is still in the shadow. In autumn, when the birch drops its leaves, the fir may return the favor. The network is a living, shifting balance sheet, guided not by altruism, but by a logic written in the language of survival. But how do we know this is happening? The forest, after all, keeps its secrets well. The discovery of these silent conversations is the fruit of decades of patient research. Scientists have traced the movement of isotopically labeled carbon with a signature detectable in the lab, from one tree to another. They have observed how trees connected by the same fungus fare better in times of stress, how they grow more quickly, survive droughts more often, and resist pests more successfully than those left isolated. The evidence, once sparse and fragmentary, now forms a rich mosaic of insight. Listen then to the story of the Douglas fir and the paper birch, told not in legend but in data. In the forests of British Columbia, researchers injected carbon-13, a rare and traceable form of carbon, into the leaves of birch trees. Later, they found this same carbon in the needles of nearby Douglas fir, which had not been directly exposed to the isotope. The only path was through the soil, through the shared mycorrhizal network. When the birch was in full leaf and the fir shaded, the birch sent carbon to its neighbour. In autumn, when the fir's needles still worked but the birch was bare, the fir returned the favour. The exchange was reciprocal, a quiet commerce beneath the fallen leaves. Yet these exchanges are not always acts of generosity. The fungal network is not a utopia, but a marketplace. Trees compete as well as cooperate. Some species are more generous than others. Some take more than they give. The fungi, too, are not neutral. Each has its own interests, and some will preferentially direct nutrients to the trees that offer the richest sugar rewards. Others play favorites, forming exclusive partnerships and shutting out competitors. The network is a living negotiation, shaped by the dance of need and opportunity. What then of the idea that trees talk? The notion is both poetic and imprecise. Trees do not speak in words or thoughts, nor do they possess the conscious intent that we associate with communication. Yet they do transmit information about threats, about resources, about their own state of health. These signals, carried by molecules and electrical impulses, shape the behavior of their neighbors. The forest is not a collection of silent, isolated individuals, but a web of relationships, each strand humming with meaning. Distress signals are only one part of this conversation. Trees also send messages of abundance. When nutrients are plentiful, some trees may share their excess, stabilizing the network and ensuring its resilience. Saplings in the shadows, unable to photosynthesize enough to survive, may receive a lifeline from their elders. The network smooths the peaks and valleys of fortune, buffering the community against the vagaries of wind, drought, and disease. There are other signals, more mysterious still. Some plants release volatile chemicals into the air when attacked, scents that drift on the breeze and warn others of danger. But the underground network is subtler, its messages less easily detected by human senses. Scientists are only beginning to understand the full range of signals that pass from root to root through the fungal web. Some may be chemical, simple molecules that trigger changes in gene expression. Others may be electrical, tiny pulses that ripple through the network like whispers in the dark. The forest speaks in many tongues, most of which we are only just beginning to translate. To appreciate the scale of this network, imagine a single teaspoon of forest soil. In that small scoop, there may be many kilometers of fungal hyphae, so fine they are invisible to the naked eye. These threads connect tree to tree, shrub to shrub, root to root, weaving the forest community into a single living tapestry. The largest known fungal individual, a species of Armillaria in Oregon, sprawls across more than 3 square miles, its filaments linking trees that, to the human eye, seem unconnected. And yet, for all our knowledge, much remains hidden. The interactions between trees and fungi are shaped by countless variables: species, age, season, soil conditions, the presence or absence of other organisms. Some fungi form mutualistic partnerships, others are parasites, and some relationships shift over time from one to the other. The motives, if motives can be said to exist, are not always clear. Sometimes a tree will shut down the flow of nutrients, becoming isolated from the network. At other times, the network will bypass a tree, favoring others in its place. The logic of these choices is complex, and we have only begun to decipher it. There are limits to our understanding, and limits too to the reach of the network itself. Not all trees participate equally. Some species are less prone to forming mycorrhizal partnerships, or may rely on different kinds of fungi, creating sub-networks within the larger web. Disturbances, logging, soil compaction, pollution can break the network, leaving trees isolated and vulnerable. The resilience of the forest depends not just on individual trees, but on the health of the network that binds them together. The idea of a sentient, purposeful forest, a place where trees love their young and warn their neighbors, has a certain romance. But the reality is both subtler and in its own way more wonderful. The forest is a system shaped by millions of years of evolution, its forms and functions honed by the relentless pressure to survive. The sharing of resources, the transmission of signals, the balance between competition and cooperation, all arise from the needs and capabilities of the organisms involved. There is no guiding mind, no overarching plan, only the patient, ceaseless adaptation of life to its circumstances. To walk in the forest, knowing these things, is to feel the earth beneath one's feet as alive in a way that words can scarcely capture. Every step presses down on a network of living threads, each one humming with the silent exchanges of the woodland community. The trees above, so still and silent, are in fact engaged in a constant dialogue, their fortunes rising and falling with the ebb and flow of sugars, minerals, and messages beneath the soil. From time to time a tree will fall, struck by lightning, felled by wind, or felled by age. In its final days, it sometimes sends a last, generous gift into the network, passing on what remains of its resources to its neighbors, to its kin, to the community that will persist after it is gone. The fungi, ever opportunistic, move in to break down the wood, recycling its nutrients and returning them to the soil. The cycle continues, the network endures, and the forest grows on. And yet, for all we know of these silent conversations, there is always more to learn. New research reveals signals we did not suspect, relationships we had not imagined, patterns that defy our expectations. The language of the forest is written in chemistry and electricity, in the logic of life and death, in the patient, ceaseless work of roots and fungi. It is a language we are only just learning to hear. As the night deepens and the stars gleam overhead, the forest below is alive with silent communication. The trees stand in quiet dignity, their trunks rising like columns in a vast green cathedral. Beneath them, the living web pulses with signals and exchanges, weaving together the destinies of species and individuals alike. In this darkness, there is movement, connection, purpose. If not the purpose of consciousness, then the purpose of life itself, unfolding through silent, ceaseless conversation. And so, as dawn waits beyond the horizon, we find ourselves poised on the threshold of deeper mysteries. The silent conversations of the woodland are not finished, and our understanding is not complete. Beyond the fungal web lie other forms of connection, other ways that trees sense, respond, and endure. The story of their resilience, their adaptation, and their place in the broader world is still unfolding, waiting for those who would listen more closely to the quiet wisdom of the forest. There is a peculiar magic in the art of listening, not merely with the ears, but with every sense, every patient tool, every clever experiment and wondering mind humanity has ever devised. Out among the forests, where the greenwood shimmers and the roots quietly entangle beneath the mossy floor, scientists have learned to listen in new ways. They have begun to eavesdrop on the silent conversations that ripple among trees, whispered through the threads of fungi, the pulsing flow of sugars, the faint drift of chemical messages. As the 20th century waned and the 21st dawned, the question turned, can we, with all our cleverness, truly catch the murmurings of the green network? Let us travel back to when such an idea would have sounded to most scientists like mere fancy. For many years, the notion that trees could communicate or even influence one another was dismissed as quaint folklore or poetic license. The forest, in the prevailing view, was a place of competition, of solitary striving. Each tree, it was believed, sought only its patch of sun and soil, locked in a slow, relentless contest against its neighbors. The soil, a mere medium, not a messenger, was thought to be the neutral ground upon which this drama unfolded. Yet beneath the canopy, older wisdom lingered. Indigenous peoples across the world had long spoken of the forest as a web of kinship and reciprocity, a living community where trees nursed saplings, mourned the fallen, and shared the gifts of water and shade. It would take the patient, skeptical, ingenious work of modern ecologists and botanists to bring these truths into the light of science. How do we listen, then, to a conversation that passes not through sound, but through the secret architecture of soil and root and mycelium? The answer begins with the simplest tools: careful observation, keen attention to pattern, and the willingness to be surprised. In the 1960s and 70s, a few pioneering researchers began to suspect that something more was afoot beneath the forest floor. Some noticed that seedlings shaded by older trees seemed to thrive better than expected, as if some invisible hand were feeding them. Others observed that saplings planted in disturbed fungus-poor soils fared poorly, even when water and nutrients were plentiful. The hints were tantalizing, but the mechanisms remained hidden. It was not until the closing decade of the 20th century that a new generation of scientists equipped with ever more sensitive technologies would begin to peel back the veil. Among them was a young Canadian ecologist named Suzanne Simard, whose work would become foundational to our understanding of the green network. Simard grew up in the forests of British Columbia, where her family worked as loggers. From an early age, she noticed odd things: the way birch and fir seemed to flourish together, the way clear-cuts struggled to regenerate. When she entered the scientific world, she brought with her a sensitivity to the forest as community rather than mere collection. But to convince others, she would need more than intuition. She would need evidence clear enough to sway the most skeptical. The question simmered: could trees, through the soil, actually share resources? Could they, in a sense, help one another survive? And if so, how could this be measured, made visible to human eyes? Here, the tools of biochemistry and nuclear physics proved unexpectedly useful. One of the most elegant approaches involved the use of isotopic traces, rare, harmless forms of elements that can be tracked as they move through living systems. Carbon, for instance, is the basic currency of plant life. All green plants capture carbon dioxide from the air and turn it into sugars through photosynthesis. By exposing a tree to air enriched with a rare, heavy form of carbon, carbon-13 or carbon-14, researchers could label that tree's sugars with an invisible signature. Imagine, then, a quiet grove in the Pacific Northwest. Under the cool shade of a mature Douglas fir, a young birch tree stretches its delicate leaves. Researchers enclose the birch in a transparent tent and flood it briefly with air containing the telltale isotopic carbon. The birch, breathing in the heavy carbon dioxide, incorporates it into its leaves, its sap, its body. Now the clock starts ticking. Over the next hours and days, samples are taken from the roots of nearby firs, from the soil, from the mycorrhizal fungi that thread their way between root and root. Using ultrasensitive mass spectrometers, scientists look for the faint but unmistakable signature of the heavy carbon. What they find astonishes even the most cautious. The labeled carbon, photosynthesized by the birch, begins to appear in the tissues of neighboring firs, sometimes within a single day. The only plausible route, through the soil, via the networks of mycorrhizal fungi that connect the roots of both trees. In some cases, up to 40% of a young seedling's carbon stores can be traced to its neighbors. This is not mere leakage, nor a trivial trickle. It is, by any measure, a transfer of food, a lifeline from one tree to another. Simard and her colleagues performed a dazzling array of such experiments. Sometimes they labeled one species, sometimes another. Sometimes they shaded one tree to simulate the stress of a cloudy summer or a spreading canopy, then watched as its neighbors, flush with sunlight, seemed to send a share of their bounty through the fungal network. At other times, they girdled a tree, cutting a ring of bark to block the downward flow of photosynthate, and watched as the flow of carbon to neighbors slowed, then ceased. These experiments, repeated in forests and greenhouses and controlled chambers, revealed something profound. The mycorrhizal network was not just a pipeline for nutrients. It was a living, responsive system, sensitive to the needs and fortunes of its members. When a tree was injured or starved of light, its neighbors, sometimes of a different species, could, through the fungal web, send extra carbon to sustain it. In the complex economy of the forest, survival was not always a solitary struggle, but a collective endeavor. To probe further, scientists devised ever more ingenious tests. In some trials, they introduced artificial stress, drought, for instance, or insect herbivory. When a tree's leaves were eaten by caterpillars, its roots began to release a burst of certain chemical compounds. These distress signals, a kind of underground Morse code, travelled via the mycorrhizal network to neighbouring plants, which in response ramped up their own defences, producing bitter chemicals or toughening their cell walls. The trees, in effect, were warning each other, danger is near. Here too, isotopic tracers played a key role. Researchers could label not just carbon, but nitrogen, phosphorus, even water molecules, tracking their movement through the tangled web. In some cases, the transfer was astonishingly precise. When one tree was infected with a pathogen, neighbouring trees received not only a chemical warning, but also a share of immune-boosting compounds, antioxidants, antimicrobial agents, sent through the mycorrhizal threads. Of course, every experiment posed new questions. Was this sharing truly altruistic, or was it a byproduct of the network's architecture? Did trees choose their partners, favouring kin or neighbours of their own species? Or was the fungal network itself the main actor, shuttling resources to where they were most needed to ensure its own survival? The answers, as so often in nature, are subtle and layered. Some experiments suggest that trees do, in fact, preferentially support their own offspring or close relatives, a phenomenon known as kin selection. Others show that the mycorrhizal fungi, acting as brokers, may allocate resources to those trees best able to supply sugars in return, a quiet negotiation unfolding beneath our feet. To listen to the green network, then, requires not just clever tools, but a willingness to embrace complexity. The signals are faint, the pathways intricate and shifting. In some forests, a single tree may be connected to dozens of neighbors of many species through several different kinds of fungi. The network expands and contracts with the seasons, with drought or deluge, with fire or logging. It is, in every sense, alive. Yet for all the sophistication of modern science, much of what we know has been made possible by simple, patient observation. Suzanne Simard, for all her technical skill, is foremost a listener, a watcher of patterns, a noticer of anomalies. Her experiments, so often conducted beneath rain-soaked boughs or in the humming quiet of the laboratory, are guided by a deep sense of humility before the mysteries of the forest. Other researchers, working in distant biomes, have added their own notes to the symphony. In the African savannas, ecologists have tracked the spread of acacia tree signals, volatile chemicals released into the air when a tree is browsed by giraffes, warning others nearby to flood their leaves with toxins. In the Amazon, botanists have traced the pulsing flow of nutrients through the tangled understory, mapping the hidden highways of fungal threads that connect the roots of towering sabres and delicate saplings alike. The tools are as varied as the questions. Gas chromatographs to analyze the air for fleeting chemical whispers, DNA sequencing to unravel the identities of the myriad fungi that knit the soil together, fluorescent dyes to illuminate the journey of water and sugars beneath the bark. Even acoustic sensors in some daring experiments to catch the faint clicks and pops that roots make as they grow, or as water surges through their vessels. And always the experiments grow more ambitious. In one study, researchers constructed miniature forest microcosms in glass-walled terraria, planting seedlings with and without mycorrhizal partners. By carefully controlling every variable, light, water, nutrients, they watched as networks formed or failed to form. Seedlings connected by fungi grew faster, survived longer, showed greater resilience to drought and disease. The lesson, repeated across continents and climates, is unmistakable. The network is not a luxury, but the very fabric of forest life. Yet the act of listening does not end with the detection of signals. It demands interpretation, imagination, the painstaking work of teasing meaning from noise. Are the trees talking in any sense we can recognize? Or are we, perhaps, projecting our own metaphors onto a system that is intricate but ultimately alien? Here science stands on the brink of poetry. The language of the forest is not our language, and yet it is no less real for its strangeness. Simard herself has written of the mother trees, the oldest, largest trees in a stand, which seem to act as hubs connecting dozens of smaller trees through vast mycorrhizal webs. When these elders are cut, the network collapses and the community suffers. When they remain, the forest endures. Is this wisdom or mere accident? The experiments suggest patterns that echo kinship, memory, even care, yet always the mystery deepens, As the tools grow ever more refined, the questions multiply. Can forests, through their networks, adapt to the stresses of climate change? Could we, by understanding and nurturing these connections, help restore damaged woodlands, heal soils, or even slow the warming of the earth? The act of listening, once a curiosity, has become an imperative. To hear the forest's voice is to glimpse a future where cooperation, not competition, is the very law of life. Still, for all our cleverness, the deepest truths remain hidden in the half-light beneath the trees. The network is always shifting, always remaking itself. Each new discovery is a door opening onto further questions, further wonders. In the hush of the forest, in the slow pulse of root and mycelium, the conversation continues, waiting for those patient enough to listen. As night settles over the woodland and the wind stirs softly in the canopy, one might wonder, what other secrets lie hidden in the green depths? If we have learned to listen, what might we yet hear? The subtle interplay of memory, the passing of signals between ancient giants and fragile saplings, the slow dance of recovery after fire or storm, in the gentle whoosh. The next question beckons, and the story is far from complete. In the cool hush of a forest at dusk, where the last golden filaments of sunlight slip through the green canopy, a deeper music stirs, one not shaped by wind or bird call, but by the living, listening network beneath your feet. This is the symphony of symbiosis, a melody composed over millions of years, played out in the silent, ceaseless exchanges between trees, fungi, and the myriad unseen denizens of the soil. To truly hear it, one must quiet the mind and let go of the notion that communication is only for the ears, or that community must be defined by the same boundaries as our own. Let us linger, then, in this twilight between the known and the mysterious, and consider what it means for beings, rooted or roaming, to form a community. What lessons might the trees, in their patient mutualism, offer to those who live above the soil's surface, believing themselves separate and individual? A forest, to the hurried human eye, may appear as a gathering of solitary trunks, each striving upward for its own share of sun. But beneath, an invisible web unites them into a living tapestry. The mycorrhizal fungi that thread through the earth knit root to root, tree to tree, sapling to ancient giant. Nutrients, water, warning signals, and whispers of chemical dialogue flow along these filaments, forming a kind of collective intelligence, a wood-wide web, as some have called it. Here, the concept of self blurs. One tree's roots may entwine with another's, and through fungal partners their fortunes entwine as well. When one is wounded by drought or insect, it sends warning signals through this network. Nearby trees, upon receiving these signals, prepare their own defenses, closing their stomata or producing bitter chemicals to deter attackers. Sometimes, an elder tree will shuttle stored sugars to shaded seedlings, ensuring the next generation survives. The forest, then, is less a congregation of individuals and more an emergent, dynamic community, one that senses, responds, and adapts as a whole. consider how foreign this seems to human instinct. Our societies are built on stories of competition and triumph, of individuals striving against the odds, and yet beneath the surface of our own world invisible connections shape every life. The symphony of symbiosis in the forest asks us to reconsider the boundaries of community, to ask whether true health, true flourishing, might depend not on isolation, but on interdependence. There is a word from the ancient Greeks, koinonia, which means a deep communal sharing, a participation in something greater than oneself. In the forest, this notion is not metaphor, but material reality. Each tree's life is inextricable from the others, bound by threads of cooperation, the secret commerce of carbon, nitrogen, and information. One might picture the forest not as a crowd, but as an organism, an entity of many trunks and limbs, each cell distinct, yet all pulsing to the same slow rhythm. How, then, might this vision of symbiotic community echo into the realm of human experience? The parallels are both humbling and profound. Our bodies, after all, are themselves mosaics of symbiosis, each cell harboring mitochondria, the ancient descendants of once independent bacteria. Our skin and guts teem with microbial partners essential to our health, their genes outnumbering our own. Even our minds, those supposed fortresses of individuality, are shaped by the social and ecological webs in which we are embedded. In cities and villages, in families and circles of friends, we participate in networks not unlike the mycorrhizal webs of the forest. We share knowledge, resources, warnings, and care. Our well-being, though we may forget it, is not truly ours alone. It is woven from the health of those around us and of the larger communities, human and more than human, that sustain us. Yet the forest's symphony is not a utopia. There is competition as well as cooperation. Some trees hoard resources, some fungi exploit their hosts. The network can transmit disease as well as aid. But even in this, there is a lesson that true community is not a denial of conflict, but a recognition of inescapable interconnectedness. It is a dance between self and other, a negotiation as old as life itself. As we listen to the whispered conversations of trees, a philosophical question arises, gentle and persistent. What does it mean to belong? For a tree, belonging is literal, the entanglement of roots, the sharing of sustenance, the mutual shaping of growth and form. For us, the answer is more elusive, but perhaps no less rooted in the webs we inhabit. When a mother tree, battered by time and weather, sends her final sugars to a nearby sapling, she is not sacrificing herself, but participating in the endless cycle of renewal. When a stand of beeches thickens its leaves in response to a neighbour's distress signal, it is not mere instinct, but a kind of communal memory encoded in the chemistry of sap and soil. These acts are both practical and poetic, a testament to the power of connection across generations. In human life, too, we are shaped by those who came before, by stories, genes, customs, and the infrastructures built by unseen hands. Our sense of self is scaffolded by language, by relationships, by the subtle influence of culture and place. Like the forest, we are not islands, but archipelagos, linked by bridges above and currents below. There is a quiet humility in this realization. To see oneself as part of a larger symphony is to relinquish the fantasy of absolute autonomy, to embrace instead the beauty of participation. It is to recognize that the threads running through the soil, the air, and the heart are not chains, but lifelines. The more closely scientists peer into the lives of trees, the more mysterious and wondrous their communities become. There are forests where ancient mother trees still nurture their kin centuries after their own crowns have faded. There are groves where trees of different species share with one another, their roots and fungal partners transcending boundaries that humans might impose. Even fallen logs, rich with decay, become bridges for new life, their nutrients ferried by fungi into the roots of seedlings yet to see the sun. This is not sentimentality but the poetry of fact. The world is built from partnerships, from lichen that marries fungus with alga, to coral reefs that depend on the synchrony of polyps and symbiotic microbes, to the human child learning language at a parent's knee. Everywhere, life persists not through isolation, but through the intricate choreography of togetherness. And so as we walk the forest path, or simply pause in our own rooms with the window open to the night, we might ask, what would it mean to model our communities, our neighborhoods, nations, and species on the symphony of the woods? What might we learn from the trees about resilience, reciprocity, and the slow wisdom of care? Perhaps it is not a matter of copying, but of listening, of attuning ourselves to the rhythms and relationships that already sustain us. The forest does not teach in words, but in patterns. The arc of a branch reaching for light, the gradual enrichment of soil by fallen leaves, the hush that falls when the wind changes and all the crowns lean together. In these gestures there is a kind of quiet instruction, a reminder that thriving requires both individuality and interdependence. In our modern world, it is easy to forget this. We are surrounded by symbols of separation, walls, screens, borders drawn in ink and guarded by law. Yet beneath the surface, the reality is otherwise. Our economies, our climate, our food and water, even the air we breathe are shared. The boundaries we draw are provisional, fragile, and ultimately permeable. There is a story, half remembered from a northern forest, of a logger who felled a great cedar, only to find its roots still pulsing with life weeks later, fed by the network of neighbors. The tree, though fallen, was not dead, but held in the embrace of the community. In this, there is both a warning and a hope, that our actions ripple outward in ways we cannot always see, and that healing too may begin in the quiet persistence of connection. To contemplate the symphony of symbiosis is to accept that mystery will always remain. science can trace the flow of chemicals, map the architecture of fungal filaments, record the changes in gene expression as messages pass from root to root. But the meaning of these exchanges, the sense of belonging, the subtle negotiations of care and competition, eludes easy measurement. Like music, the essence of the forest's community lies not in its notes, but in the spaces between, in the resonance that lingers after the last chord. This perhaps is the greatest gift the trees can offer, a sense of perspective, a recalibration of scale. Their lives unfold across centuries. Their memories are written in rings and scars, in the composition of the soil and the pattern of the understory. They bear witness to storms and seasons, to the slow passage of generations. In their patience, there is both a challenge and an invitation to look beyond the span of our own days, to imagine ourselves as part of a continuum, a web whose farthest threads we may never see. Such reflection may seem abstract, even fanciful, but it has practical consequence. When we recognize our kinship with the forest, our own responsibilities shift. Conservation is no longer merely the preservation of scenery, but the tending of relationships, the safeguarding of the networks that sustain not only trees, but birds and insects, mammals and mushrooms, and ultimately ourselves. To cut a tree is to alter a symphony. To restore a woodland is to mend a chord. There are those who argue that such thinking is too sentimental, that nature is red in tooth and claw, and that community is an illusion. But the science of symbiosis offers a more nuanced vision, one in which competition and cooperation are not opposites, but partners in an intricate dance. The forest is both battlefield and sanctuary, a place where suffering and support are woven together. Our own societies are no different. In the end, perhaps the most profound lesson is this: that community is not a static thing, but a living process. It is made, unmade, and remade with every interaction, with every root that reaches out, every signal sent, every resource shared or withheld. In the forest, as in human life, there is no final harmony, only the ongoing work of attunement. As dusk deepens and the air cools, one might imagine the trees settling into their nocturnal rhythms. Sap slows, leaves close their pores, roots drink deeply of the earth's moisture. Yet beneath this apparent stillness, the conversation continues. The slow chemical dialogue of roots and fungi, the subtle shifts in growth and defense, the silent tending of connections. We too inhabit a world alive with unseen signals, with gestures of care, with the possibility of kinship that extends beyond the boundaries of species or time. The trees remind us that to be alive is to be in relation, that our fates are braided, our futures entwined. And so, as night folds around the forest, and the first stars prick the sky above the darkened crowns, there remains an invitation to listen, to learn, to join the symphony that began long before we arrived and will echo on long after we are gone. The meaning of community, like the song of the woods, is never fixed, but always unfolding, waiting perhaps for you to add your own note to its ancient ongoing refrain. As our gentle journey through the secret whispers of the trees drifts to a close, may their quiet language linger like a comet tail fading into the hush of space. Rest now in the peaceful glow of nature's mysteries, and when your heart is ready, return with me for more Dreamtime tales woven from the stars.